What are we going to talk about in detail about what is data-driven recruitment? Because obviously everybody has a different opinion on what it entails, why you should be doing data-driven recruitment, and then very importantly, how can you start, how can you outperform your competitors, and what can you do right now, even today, to start collecting data, which you then might use for your next campaign. Because that's important. There's a couple of setup things you need to get right on your website, and we'll help you with that. Okay. Maybe just why? Let's start with that, because that's important. Why you should kind of look at data, play around with data, analyze data. Because for one, it will help you understand what's happening, right? If your boss or your customer asks you, why are things not working? Well, you'll have to understand first what's happening before you can give them a good answer. And secondly, you can then optimize based on the data you have gathered. You can actually use that to move along and to optimize your campaigns. Maybe just to have an understanding of the level of data-driven recruitment, I'm just going to start by asking a very simple question in the poll. Let me ask this first. Whether any of you have already published a paid campaign on Facebook? So you can just tell me yes or no for me to understand whether you're aware with things like impression, reach, other advertising related items on Facebook. Okay, we have a majority at the moment of yes. So, okay. Thanks for that. Oh, it's 50-50 now. Cool. All right. Maybe one slide about us, and I hate webinars where people use that to only sell their stuff. We're not going to do that now, but we just want to give you a bit of background of what Simple does. Basically, the only thing we do is recruitment marketing. We have specific software for that, which basically also means that we've run about 5,500 campaigns over the last couple of years. We analyze more than 11 million data points per month. So we have a lot of data. We have a lot of insights about what we do and what we do for our customers. And as you can see, obviously, we do campaigns for enterprise customers and also for small and medium enterprises. So we have a nice mix in our portfolio. You'll see the examples throughout. I'm going to give you plenty of examples on what we do, where we have performed, where we have not performed, and why we think that is. So I hope to share that with you and make you a lot wiser in 45 minutes. And again, please don't hesitate to ask questions or not. Okay, good. Now, better insight, that's what you're going to be using the data for. Now, important to understand when we talk about insight, when we talk about the recruitment funnel, there's a couple of steps. The first one is you're going to have to attract people to make sure that they know about your vacancy, that they know about the fact that you're recruiting. Once they do know, hopefully, they'll end up visiting your vacancy on your website. Some of those will apply, not everybody, unfortunately. Well, although fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I guess. And then of all those people who have applied, you will hire one, two, or a couple of people from the applications. And this funnel, and obviously I know we're kind of making it a lot more simple than it really is, but these are the basic building steps of that funnel. And actually, the beauty of data-driven recruitment is you can put data analysis in every part of the of this funnel. And we'll go into detail on that. But it's important to keep that kind of funnel in mind when we move forward. Now, when you know what your funnel is, as I mentioned, you can start collecting data. And for instance, the most basic data would be this. In the attract phase, you will have a number of impressions, i.e. a number of people or eyeballs who actually have seen your advertising. From that, people will visit your vacancy. As I mentioned, some of them will apply, and then hopefully you'll hire some of them. This is pretty basic stuff, pretty basic data. And at least it's very basic. If you don't have this tracking system in place to start tracking this, it's going to be very difficult to do a thorough data analysis. But I'm going to assume you have, or you're willing to put it in place. And like I mentioned, we'll talk about that in about 15 minutes. So if you're watching the recorded version of this, you can just fast forward to 15 minutes, or you can hear everything else I'm going to explain to you about this. Now, once you have those numbers, obviously you want to be able to understand, what does this mean, right? How do I benchmark this? Is this good? Is this bad? One of the ways of doing that is to start linking it to the amount of money you've invested, right? Once you do that, you can then start understanding, okay, if I spent €1,000 on getting 200,000 impressions, that means I've paid €0.50 for a customer. I paid €12.50 for an application. CPA, cost per application, is 12.5. And obviously that means then, because you only have one hire, you've paid €1,000 for that hire. In advertising cost, there's other costs. There's your time. There's maybe an agency which is involved. But again, like I said, for the ratios here and for the calculations, we're going to keep it quite simple to make sure that you can follow the thinking. Now, once you have that, you can start going further, and then you can start looking at bottlenecks. What is my biggest bottleneck? Is it actually getting people from attract to vacancy, meaning you get a lot of impressions, but people who have seen the ad are not clicking through? Or is it, well, you get a lot of people, you get 2,000 people on your vacancy, but once they've read your vacancy, nobody's clicking, nobody's actually applying, right? Those are two very different problems. And obviously, once you understand that, that will give you the tools to actually start working and improving the problem and fixing that bottleneck. And if both issues are your problems, well, then you have more problems, and you just need more time to fix them. Now, there's a lot of different scenarios at play here. What I mean with that is, you don't work in isolation. Not everything is happening on your website. Yes, your website is a crucial part in the whole funnel, but you might have impressions on Facebook, you might have impressions on Instagram, you might have impressions on your local job board, like for instance in Belgium it's called VDAB, or you might have impressions on LinkedIn. You have an application, which is a specific item, an event that happens on your website, and obviously you need to have an overview, and you need to get the data from all those sources and collect them in one place to do your analysis. Now, there's a couple of free tools to do that. One of them is Google Analytics. I really advise you, if you're serious about data-driven recruitment, to dive into. There's a lot of free courses on Google Analytics. But first of all, to install the necessary tags with another free tool, which is called Google Tag Manager, which is an easy way, without needing programming skills, to actually define events, define pixels, define moments on your website that you want to track. Right? Later on, I'll share the link to our data-driven recruitment white paper, where you can go and look in detail on how you can install or how you can actually work with Google Tag Manager to put everything in place. But that's important to first realize you have different sources, and you need one place, one location to bring all that data together in order to allow you to analyze it. Right? And even if you don't have time to analyze it just yet, right? Or you think, well, I'm only going to be having time for that in 2 months' time. Today is the day, or maybe not today, Thursday at 5:15, or depending on your time zone. But then at least tomorrow should be the day where you talk to your IT team, you install Google Tag Manager, and you put the necessary tracking tools in place, so at least you can start tracking as of today. Even if you don't have time to analyze it, because the longer you wait, the less data you're going to have, and the more time you're going to need to optimize your recruitment campaign. So as a next step, please put that in red into your notebook. Start installing the necessary pixels and the necessary tagging, tracking tools onto your website. Okay, now, we've talked about application, we talked about your website, we talked about what's happening on your website. not only is it going to be important to be able to kind of have the tracking in place, but you actually also need a process to allow that. What do I mean with that? If on your website you allow people to apply just by sending you an email, and allow me just to kind of refresh in my throat. It's been a long day, so apologies for the hoarse voice. If on your website the way to apply is by sending an email, and then what you then do, people come into your inbox, you put them in an Excel sheet, that's going to make it very, very difficult to keep everything in one place. So we strongly advise you to look at tools where you can actually keep everything onto your website. Just going to show you one of the tools we're using. So the flow, for instance, could be people will see an advertising on Facebook. They click on it. They then come onto your website. Make sure your website is responsive, i.e. mobile friendly, because that's about 90% of traffic will come through mobile. And once they apply, instead of sending an email, you could, for instance, use a chatbot. Okay, and this chatbot, again, not only will it make it very attractive for people to make sure they apply, and you can ask them the right questions, but even more importantly, you keep them on the website. You can track how many people have clicked on your on your chatbot, and you can actually start taking conclusions and making analysis on that. Right? And then, for instance, once they finish the chatbot, you can send them to what we call a thank you page. Right? I'm sure you have it also. Also on your thank you page, it's going to be important to make a specific event and to make sure you can tag how many people come there, so you know how many people visited your website, but also how many people actually went through the whole process of applying. So it's just about keeping as much of your process online, right, where you're able, thanks to Google Analytics, thanks to Google Tag Manager, to put the right tracking tools in place. And again, I hope that was clear. All those tools are free. So don't hesitate, kind of, this is not me pushing Google. Unfortunately, I don't have shares in Google, or not, I didn't buy them at the right time, let's put it like that. So I'm not pushing Google for any other reason than just as some advice for a good free tool to start working on data-driven recruitment. Okay, I'm just going to check if there's any questions, but nothing at the moment. Okay, sorry, there's a question from Edward. 1 second. Okay, so the question from Edward is whether we are using our own tools for analysis, or whether we are using specific tools for lead gen analysis and research. We have built our own tools, right? Basically, we are, which is called, we have the APIs. API is the application processing interface of Facebook, which we are connected with. Same for LinkedIn, same for WordPress, for our website, which we all bring together in our own tool and where we do the analysis. So yes, we have basically increased it up a notch, and we've also built a nice software platform around that to make it easy for you to do yourself. But I'll show that at the end. Okay, thanks for that question, Evert. Xenia asks whether I recommend using a chatbot or a form for the application. Okay, we recommend using a chatbot. Why? Because it will give you a lot more tracking possibilities. What happens with a form is that you'll be able to know whether people have started filling out a form, but not more. So you won't know when did they stop, why did they stop, how much time did they spend on filling in the form, because the form is a very static moment onto your website. And with some advanced Google Analytics, you can actually start tracking it, but it's quite complicated. So it's better to kind of, you can buy an off-the-shelf chatbot, you can subscribe to some chatbots and use them on your website. And when you properly integrate them, you'll get a lot more data from that. So that's a data-driven question. That's a data-driven answer. The second answer is more from a user perspective, is that a chatbot will work a lot better. We have done plenty of testing on that. When you build an interactive chatbot that will help and will convince a lot more people to apply to your vacancy instead of a boring form. Okay, good. Just checking. Good. Next slide is about conversion rate. So assuming you've put everything in place, assuming you're able to analyze the data, you can start calculating with that. And you can start working, for instance, on your conversion rate. Now, what does that mean? It means the number of applications you get divided by the visitors on your vacancy times 100. Putting that in numbers, if you get 50 applications, 1,250 people have actually viewed your vacancy. That means you have a conversion rate of 4%. Which is very good, I have to say, right? So getting cold traffic onto your website and then a conversion of 4% is pretty good, right? Just as a kind of as benchmark, you have to think about or kind of be ready that for some vacancies, you might get 0.5%, right? If you're doing extremely well, you could get 5 to 6%, but that's kind of an outlier. Right, so that's the base. It's very important to kind of track that because it's going to have a big impact on your advertising spend and on the money you're going to have to spend to get candidates onto your, to get candidates to apply. So conversion rate are important to understand. Now, this is the conversion rate which we calculate for the visitors on your website, but you can do this for everything. You can do your conversion rate for the actually on Facebook. How many people have seen your ad, and then how many have clicked through to actually see your vacancy. That's your conversion rate for your advertising. So you can use conversion rate at different stages in the funnel. Again, as I mentioned, keep in mind, think funnel, right? Think stage to stage to stage, and conversion is an important part of that. Okay. Now, if you look at the funnel, attract is one of the very important parts of getting it right. You're going to have to need, even if you have an amazing employer brand. Actually, I'm allergic to discussions about employer brands because everybody wants the same kind of employer brand. And whether you have a great employer brand or not, that doesn't mean you're going to get traffic, right? And what you're responsible for, I'm assuming, as you're part of the audience, you participate in this webinar, you're responsible for making sure people apply. You need to fill vacancies, and for that, you need traffic. And there's a couple of different ways to get traffic, right? These are the most used names for the categories, right? It's paid traffic, social traffic, organic, and direct. And just to kind of give you a brief introduction to that, paid traffic, very clear, it's the traffic you pay for, right? You pay for a vacancy on LinkedIn, you pay for a advertising on Facebook, that's paid traffic. Social traffic is, for instance, you put something on your Facebook wall, one of your followers sees that, and they will actually click on that and come onto your vacancy. That's social traffic. Organic traffic will be somebody who's looking for sales vacancy in London, SEO. You might show up in the results. If people click on that, that's organic. Now you can discuss whether social is also kind of organic traffic or not. Let's leave that for another webinar, right? And finally, you have direct traffic, which basically means people kind of know your page. They've typed in your website, and then on your website, they clicked on vacancies, went to your job page, and they applied. That's direct traffic. And as I mentioned, some people have kind of slightly different interpretations of these categories. Doesn't really matter, right? What's important is to understand you have different categories of traffic. And in order for you to analyze traffic, it's going to be important to understand where people are coming from, right? Did they come from Facebook? Did they come from Google, SEO? Did they come straight onto your website and are they direct traffic? Because obviously, organic and direct traffic is kind of free, right? You haven't paid for that traffic at that moment. That doesn't mean maybe they saw some advertising from you 2 weeks ago. You'll never know, right? But as much as you know, as far as you can determine, that's free traffic. You need to analyze that differently than your paid traffic. Now, there's a couple of rules you need to take into account if you want to start tracking and analyzing traffic. And one is the UTM code. And for the diehards or the nerds among us, UTM is actually coming from Urchin Tracking Module, which is the original company who came up with this. And you probably have seen this before. What I mean with that, if ever you saw a link in your browser which had the address of where you were supposed to, of the website where you were, and then there's a question mark, and there's a whole bunch of information behind that, that's a UTM code. And basically, that's a code which is used by companies like us, and pretty soon by you too, to actually determine where people are coming from. It's actually quite simple. The names of the UTM codes you can define yourself, right? Actually, everything which you put behind a question mark in a URL, the URL is the address of your webpage. Everything which you put behind the question mark is not going to have an influence on where a visitor is going. So you can put whatever you want in there, right? We advise to use UTM codes because that's also what will be used by Google Analytics. So let's stick with that for the moment. And then you can put actually whatever you want. UTM source we use, and most people will use, to show what the source is, where people are coming from. You see some examples there. And I'm not going to read out everything which is on your screen, but basically you can use those terms to actually define and analyze later on. Okay. You could, for instance, say, look, this is Facebook. It's a CPC, cost per click, right? It's a campaign. That's the name of my campaign. You might have an employer brand campaign. You might have a vacancy campaign. So if you give them different names, that will allow you later on in Google Analytics, once the data comes in, to actually start taking conclusions from that. But what's very important, you have to keep consistency in your UTM terms. Make sure you always use the same categories when you're talking UTM, because otherwise it's going to be impossible to do a proper analysis at the back end, right? So that's important. We'll come back to that in the learnings at the end of the webinar, but UTM codes and a proper use of the UTM codes will make sure you can then do a proper analysis later on. And then, for instance, kind of to close the loop here, you will then be able to say, okay, on this vacancy page, I had 320,000 visitors. 65% of them were coming through paid traffic. And then if you set up correctly, you can click on your paid traffic and you can go into detail to understand, is more people coming from Facebook, LinkedIn? And if they are from Facebook, what campaign was working well? What video was working well? What visual was working well? So there's a massive amount of data you can get from that. But again, UTM codes, right? That's the second thing I want you to write in red in your notebook. Okay. And then, once you have the UTM codes running and buzzing into your little system, you can start playing around with that, right? We mentioned conversion rate, right? That was the easy one, applications per visitors. But now you have the data, you can go further. And what you can see here is, for instance, an easy conclusion is that although Instagram gave you a lot more visitors than Facebook, right? The quality of Facebook was actually better because your conversion rate is higher, okay? And indeed, and these are actual numbers, you'll get a lot of traffic from Indeed, but probably not that many applications, and therefore your conversion rate will be lower. I just noticed there's a question coming, so let me have a quick look. Okay, there's a question from Ines asking, how do you implement UTM codes? Where do you add these UTMs to your different links? Very good question. First of all, it's important to kind of decide on how you're going to use the terminology and what you're going to be using. Once you have that, you actually link them at the moment when you start your advertising. So give you a very basic example. If you start up your Facebook advertising, if you would be using that, on the advertising there, where you have to explain to Facebook to which vacancy page people have to go, that's the moment when you will insert your UTM codes. If you're working with Indeed, and you have a job ad on Indeed, if you set up your advertising on Indeed, that's where you put your UTM codes. So you have to put them at the source. It's very important, and a very good point and a very good question as to ask, but they have to be available at the source. From the moment people click on it, that's when the UTM codes have to be available, because actually they will travel with the click to your vacancy page. Not sure if that's an easy way of explaining it or not, but they have to be at the source, or otherwise you won't be able to do the analysis later on. Good, I hope that answered your question, Ines. I know this is quite complicated. I know we've talked a lot about recruitment on Facebook and Instagram. We actually wrote quite a good white paper on that, which I'll share now in the chat. Give me 1 second. So there you go. So if you click on that link, you will come onto our resources page, where you'll be able to see you will also see our data-driven white paper, which you can download there, which goes in a lot more detail on how to place UTM codes, how to structure them, etc., etc. Good. Okay. This the beep means. Okay. Follow-up question from Ines on the UTM codes. So the question is. Do you find the data per UTM source in Google Analytics? In my previous slide, yes, Ines. So actually, if you set up your UTM code correctly, you can slice and dice all that data in Google Analytics. You can look at UTM sources, but you can also, for instance, say, look, if you have a campaign which was used in LinkedIn and in Facebook, you can actually look at campaign level and understand the data. But the campaign, whether they're coming from Facebook or LinkedIn. So every UTM code on itself can be analyzed as a data set in Google Analytics. Okay, good. We mentioned Facebook, Instagram already a couple of times. Why are we such big fans? And these are a couple of slides which are similar to our Facebook webinar, because that's where you will be able to find passive job seekers. Actually, you have more recruiters active on LinkedIn because that's where they think they'll find candidates. And obviously, if you're in outbound recruiting, you want to reach out to people, LinkedIn is a great tool for that. I'm not going to deny. But if you're looking at inbound leads, Facebook is the place to go. And when we talk Facebook, we talk about Facebook platform, including Instagram and all the other channels which are linked to that. Now, if you're serious about advertising, your data set is going to enlarge quite significantly. There's two more things you have to learn about that. One, if you're in advertising, there's a concept of reach, right? Reach is how many users have you, or candidates have you reached with your advertising? And the second data set is impressions, right? And those are quite different. And if you divide your impressions by your reach, that's your frequency, right? So that means if you impressions is the number of people, the number of times your ad has been viewed, that's impressions. If you divide that by the number of people who have seen it, you get your frequency, i.e. how many times on average have people seen your ad. It might sound a bit complicated. Let me give you an example to clarify that. If you have 10 people who have seen your advertising once, right, but you have 5 who have seen your advertising twice, right? That means you have 20 impressions. So in total, your ad has been seen 20 times, but you've only reached 15 people, right? And then in this case, your frequency will be 1.2, I guess, or 1.25. So that's important to keep in mind. Reach impressions, frequency, because you need that data and a good understanding of that data to start the next phase of your analysis, i.e., to start do some analysis on your advertising, right? Because also there, you could start calculating impressions. Your clicks divided by your impressions is your click-through rate, right? That's 100,000 of people have seen your advertising. 1% click-through rate means 1,000 people have actually clicked through to see your advertising. You can start calculating your cost per click, right? How much money did you pay for those impressions divided by the number of clicks? That means you paid 40 cents per click. And again, those are very important parts and metrics to start analyzing in order to understand what are your bottlenecks and where do you start and need to fine tune. I realize that's quite a bit of information I've just thrown at you here. So I'm just going to pause for a second to see if there's questions or this is completely clear. Sorry, too quick there. No more questions. Okay, that either means I've explained it brilliantly and very eloquently, or the slide was just clear on itself. Either one or the other. Good. Okay. I hope that's clear now that in order to define your bottlenecks in the funnel, you need to have Google Analytics or a similar tool in place. And like I said, Google Analytics is free. There's some paying tools out there also, like Oribi, for instance, which have the advantage of being a bit easier, maybe, to analyze. But Google Analytics is a perfectly fine tool for you to use. Now, metrics is one thing, but it's also going to be very important to understand what the quality is of your advertising, right? Because obviously, that's going to be a big driver in understanding and driving the number of clicks to your vacancy page. And for that, it's going to be important to do some A/B testing. Now, showing you a very basic A/B test here. It's you show exactly the same audience, you split it in two, and 50% of the audience, you show the ad on the left, and 50% of the audience, you show the ad on the right, right? And ideally, you keep most of the elements the same. So what you can see here is that we've kept the copy the same, we've kept the function title the same, still written in Dutch here, I noticed, so we'll have to explain that, change that for the next presentation. Apologies for that. And we keep the call to action the same, right? But we change the visual. And that will allow us to understand where one visual is working better than the other. And once you do that, you can actually set up a nice A/B testing frame where you can test visuals, you can test copy, always only test one element against each other to actually then come to hopefully the best working advertising. To show you some examples on that, these are two ads which we've run for Neuhaus, which is a Belgian chocolate manufacturer, amazing chocolate, I might add, right? In this case, we tested, the only difference in the test here is the function title. I'm just going to launch a quick poll now to wake you up, because I'm sure, because of all the numbers, it's been difficult to stay awake. Just publishing a poll now, which should show up on your screen. So what do you think was the best working ad here? Maintenance supervisor or team leader maintenance? I'm just going to wait for a couple of answers to roll in. Okay. Again, 50-50 at the moment. I know, okay, slight preference for the ad on the right, on the right, team leader maintenance. Well, actually, you're right. It is the one on the right. So a lot more applications on that advertising, and therefore a lower CPA or a cost per application, which we had there. So you're starting to see everything is actually connected, right? And once you connect everything, you're able to draw some good conclusions from that. Just one more. This was an ad for a retailer, And let me publish the poll on that here. Okay, so I hope it's clear, but the one on the left just shows the team. The one on the right was a wink to COVID, where people have their mask on, their face mask on, and just an iPhone or a smartphone with their smile. So which ad do you think gave the best results? Let me, again, 50-50. And that's going head to head. Just going to give it one more second. Okay, so slight preference for the ad on the left. Well, you're right. A bit to our surprise, that ad on the left scored a lot better, and therefore also gave a lot better CPA. So I hope I explained a bit the principle of the A/B testing. But you can also do A/B testing, for instance, with video, right? We also are testing with some video advertising, and what you can see here is actually the same images, right? But the difference is here that we put the name of the vacancy up front with the one on the left, and we do it the other way around with the vacancy on the left, where we put the wanted and the name of the function title at the end. So that's also a test you can run, right? So don't be limited to the examples I just gave you here. Be creative. What's important is to realize that it's very important on your own or even with your team to understand what advertising is going to be working best. It's always best to do an A/B testing, okay? We're almost at the end. I promised 45 minutes. I will end about 45 minutes, so bear with me for a couple more slides. Maybe just to wrap up a couple of things. When you do A/B testing, it's very important, as the name suggests, right, to only test two different elements. So either you would test function name A versus function name B, right? But then you keep the picture the same, you keep your copy text the same, you keep your call to action the same. Don't start testing too many things, right? You could do an ABC test. For instance, you could test picture A, picture B, picture C, but it's going to be a lot more complicated to quickly understand what's working best. So again, especially in the beginning, keep it simple. Just do A/B testing on one parameter. That's one thing which you need to take into account in order to do proper analysis later on. And the second one, we've talked already a couple of times about that, UTM codes. First of all, use them. And secondly, be consistent, right? If you use UTM source to define Facebook, LinkedIn, or the source of your campaign, don't change that later on in UTM source platform, right? Because just by changing the name of the UTM already, that's going to give you some hassle later on. So think about how you're going to set it up. Use the tips we have in our data white paper, by all means, but be consistent and keep the consistency throughout your campaigns. And once you've done all of that right, what's important is that you could also bring everything of that together. You could use another tool from Google, right, which is called Google Data Studio, which will allow you to start building interactive dashboards, where you can bring all of the different data together. And once you have that, you can start doing some proper analysis. For instance, what is called ROAS, which is called return on ad spend, right? And then you can start really comparing channels, comparing campaigns with each other. And what you can then do, for instance, is look at what does Facebook bring you, what does Indeed bring you, where should you be spending most of your money. Got a question from Ines, and thanks for the interactivity, Ines. I love that. So the question from Ines is, how long should an A/B test run to make conclusions? And that's a very good question. I'm going to sip from my drink before answering that. Okay. It depends on how good and how obvious the results are, right? In some cases, that doesn't really happen a lot. You could see it after 1 or 2 days, right? When you do it within Facebook, for instance, Facebook will on average need 5 to 6 days to actually give you a significant result on that. So it takes a bit of time. It takes a bit of patience to do so. If you're lucky, right, it could go a lot quicker. But if you use the A/B testing tool of Facebook, it could take 5 to 6 days. Now, and I'm just using this as a shameless way to plug our software. If you use our software, you can see it in 36 hours, right? Why is that? Because obviously we use the data we have from about 5,500 campaigns, which gives us a lot more trigger points to understand when people or what actually defines good advertising, and what are already some earlier trigger points to understand what could be a better application, what could drive better applications for a specific campaign. And that actually seamlessly brings me into a very short introduction to our software. So what do we make? We make software actually which makes it a lot more easier for you to attract candidates through campaigning. And if you allow me for 5 seconds to quickly show you that live, this is one of our dashboards. So on these dashboards, you can see from all the different media, all your different campaigns, you'll be able to track everything together. You can see which ads are live, how many applications you have for each of those advertising. Our software will also automatically turn off ads that are not performing, right? So you don't have to manage that yourself. We always say this is recruitment marketing for non-marketeers. And what's nice also is that you're able to manage your candidates within the system. You can then, depending on the source, you will see which candidates are coming from Facebook, which are coming from your own website. And then depending on whether you're interested in these candidates or not, you can drag them to the next stage. And based on that input, our system will learn what candidates are interesting for you, where do they come from, and it will start adapting the campaigns. So it's a very nice tool. Even if you don't have a knowledge about Google Analytics, UTM codes, A/B testing, this tool for €99 does everything for you. So please don't hesitate. I will actually put a little link to our software in the chat. There's a free trial if you're interested for 2 weeks, so you can try it out. Okay, but let's move back to the presentation. Here we are. Okay, Q&A. We're at the end. Actually, most of you stayed tuned. That's a difficult way to put that. You stayed focused on the presentation, for which I thank you. Okay, that's the end. I'm just gonna allow for a minute or two to see if there's any specific questions. You can ask me anything about the campaigns we've shown, about our tools, about our campaigns. Go ahead, shoot. No more questions? Okay. Well, thank you for your time. You see my data in here. Please don't hesitate to send me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn. Ask me any other questions you might have. There's going to be a lot on our resources page, but feel free to ask me any other questions. Good. Just one final poll, just to get your feedback on this webinar. Just let me know, was this useful or not? And don't hesitate to say no, because we can always learn from that. So feel free to leave some feedback on that. And then I will wrap up. Thanking you for your time. Hope it was useful. And when is the next one? It's a question from Edward. Next week. Next week, we go into more detail on actually how you can analyze the different data sets. So I think you'll connect to me or connect to our simple page, and you'll get an invite for that. Okay, good. I'm going to give you 20 more seconds to ask any more questions. Yes, Edward, we'll send you an invite. Don't worry about that. Good. Okay, but no more questions at the moment. Right, everybody. Thanks for your time, and let's stay in touch and enjoy the data-driven recruitment with your teams. Bye-bye.